Hello and welcome to a new episode of The Ramp. Today we are super excited. Why? Because we have the king and the prince of assessment in the Nordics with us. We have for the first time an in-house recording, and we are here with Espen and Lasse Hansen from Fairsight. Welcome to The Ramp.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here with the king.
Yeah.
All right.
I mentioned that you were the king and prince of assessment. I think it's a fair assessment of the situation. You've co-founded Qt, that was acquired by Aon. And I was going into this episode and thinking, okay, you've done it before. You made it. You could have gone to Bali and surfed for the rest of your life and just had a decent, nice life, comfortable. But now you're doing it again. And for anyone that has been working with building a startup, it's hard work. So why are you doing it again? Why are you doing that to yourself?
I think, first of all, it's very bad judgment. Or perhaps age or bad memory, because, as you know, it takes a lot of hard work.
Oh.
And if I realized how much hard work it is, perhaps I should have gone to Bali. No, but seriously, there were so many challenges within the assessment space. Yeah. And when we were acquired in 2017, there were tons of topics that we wanted to improve. So when I made up my mind in 2021, it was easy to sit down, make the choice to sit down with Lasse and discuss how can we bring this entire field forward. So that was part of the reason, yes. And of course, you know, when you're a founder, you sort of potentially might be a bit restless, and being in big corporate might be a challenge as well. So like you said, building is interesting in itself.
Yeah. And you, Lasse, why did you...
Oh, I think it's we share the same kind of reasoning. I was also thinking about that. This was actually something Espen mentioned. He had a lunch a couple of weeks back, and we talked about, you know, if you are if you reach a certain age, it's very easy to become set in your lifestyle, you know. But if you are building something, I think it also keeps you young, even though it's stressful and everything, you know. But it's a
longevity move.
For me, I thrive on that energy, and I think I would be a bad version of myself, you know, if I hadn't done this. And I tell this story sometimes, and when you have kind of like big decisions to make, sometimes I actually go back to a book I read. I think it's 25 years or something ago, and it's called The 5 Regrets of the Dying. And it's a book by a nurse that kind of does palliative care, take care of people when they are on their deathbeds. And she saw these 5 broad themes keep coming up when people are kind of set to go on to the next phase. And all of them centered around the decisions you didn't take. And that's something that's stuck with me through all these years. And Fairsight was one of those, yeah. I'm going to regret it if we don't do it, you know. So, yeah.
So you're a yes man now? Is that what you're saying? Everything's
No, definitely not, you know. But I think, you know, some things are just too big to not try to do something with it.
Yeah. So what is that? What's sort of the elevator pitch of Fairsight?
Making hiring truly fair.
Yeah.
Yeah. That means, you know, we think that there's still a way to go. There's a lot of good work been done so far, you know. You still see things like highly educated immigrants spend 8 to 10 years before they get a job that they're qualified for. We see age as a barrier for some people. When you are 55 years or so, all of a sudden you're obsolete in terms of some roles that you were qualified for previously. Gender, especially in senior executive positions. So if you look at the biggest companies worldwide, I think it's the 5.6% of the Fortune 500 global companies are run by female CEOs. And of course, you have more recently a focus on neurodiversity as well. If you look at autism, for example, 2/3 are unemployed. If you look at Norway as one example, but you find they compared the similar statistics in the US. And if you look at those two societies, they're quite different in terms of welfare and all sorts of stuff. But you still see a majority of them being unemployed, even though you also know that they would probably bring some really superpowers to some roles, be it developers, quality assurance, and these kinds of things that demand strict focus on one task at a time. So yeah, it's interesting to try to open the door for more people, and we think assessments can be a part of that story. And the other aspect, which Espen just wrote a book about, some people, especially in leadership positions, bring things into an organization that you don't want as well. So part of the story around Fairsight is opening the door for more people, an inclusion perspective, but the other part is also saying no to someone in leadership positions. Espen can maybe tell a little bit more about that.
No, but I completely agree. It's fairness to us is on the one hand, an inclusion perspective, opening doors, like Lasse just said. But it's also closing doors to some people who potentially should not be in powerful positions. But also, if you look at the development of technology, quite a bit has happened since we were acquired, our previous venture were acquired. So when we set up Fairsight in 2022, AI, of course, is central. How we're using data is central. There are still line managers using like PDFs with percentiles of personality and all that, like they did maybe 20 years ago. And the diversity inclusion perspective, of course, like Lasse also mentioned. So there was quite a bit of things that we could look into. And we also felt that some of the assessment tools out there didn't really take into account the work life today. So we were still measuring the same competencies like collaboration, communication, planning, etc., which was always there, and which always will be there as well as personal important characteristics for jobs. But work life has changed. How we interact with technology. Can we trust this data? So critical thinking is becoming more and more important on top of traditional problem solving. Ethics will always be there, but it's perhaps even more important now than before. Social and climate responsibility, digital fluence. People are working remote. How does that influence what kind of features we need from our future employees? So there were time for an update. So I think what we measure, not only how we measure, but also what we measure is quite different now, and is more suited for today's work life and hopefully for tomorrow's work life as well.
Yeah. This is obviously quite heavy on the psychometric side of things, and then you need to ensure that you have the reliability and validity, and you might have like some crossover validation testing. So how do you, what are the step-by-step process you go through without giving it away to competitors out there?
No, I think we can start with our slogan there, which is fairness by design. That's a slogan in terms of how we build stuff. We have kind of like making hiring truly fair as the big vision kind of slogan. But we also have this fairness by design principle, and that infuses everything we do, from how to make our platform and assessments as accessible as possible for the most majority of people. There's some things that are hard to cater to. It's about being open about what we can't solve or problems, but also try to move the needle on the things we can actually solve. In practical terms, that means us being obsessed with the fonts we use on our platform and in our assessments, to make them as easily readable as possible for dyslexic people. It could be avoiding colors that could potentially discriminate colorblind people, and all sort of kind of, I would say, micro innovations that we thought about, but we think that can improve the whole experience. And when it comes to doing the actual development of the assessments, it's also thinking new there as well. Not just the quantitative data, but also the qualitative data around how our tools being perceived by people. So when you do this step-by-step development of tests, you need to do a lot of studies. And some of them are kind of like seeing, does this work on a diverse pool of candidates, etc. And you do establish reliability and validity and these kinds of things. but we also did some extra steps there in terms of getting insights from these people. And then I think that could also improved our assessments in terms of us getting hold of data that you're usually not capturing when you design these assessments. And as you probably see now, I'm not being very specific around that point, just because maybe some competitors are listening today. And we think we added a couple of steps in test development, which I think is very fruitful in terms of the data we actually get. Yeah.
Politically correct answer.
Yeah.
No, but it makes sense. Obviously, there are multiple ways of assessing people. You have structured interviews, unstructured interviews. You have personality tests, ability tests. You have numerous ways of assessing people, and some have higher predictability than others. The Schmidt and Hunter's famous report or meta study indicated that especially ability tests and some work sample test also has high predictability. Sackett's recent findings on Schmidt and Hunter's reports indicate that maybe the world is not as in the way that Schmidt and Hunter described it. So where do we stand now? How do we interpret these results? What's your take on that?
I think it's very interesting that you bring up that topic, because if we look back, the Sackett study, I think it was pre-published in 2021, late 2021, before it actually was published in a peer-reviewed journal. The findings became available, at least for some people. And we saw that then, and we saw that this is something that's going to shake up the industry. Of course, it's also important to say that the Sackett study they didn't go about trying to find the best selection methods as Schmidt and Hunter actually tried to do, but they wanted to challenge how you actually analyze the data. So that's what that study is actually about. But it's very interesting because, as you mentioned, it found some, I would say, quite surprising results. And one of them being that cognitive ability is not that strong predictor of job performance as we previously thought. And I think if you look into what those people behind the study says, they are quite quick to say that this is not a case that you should drop cognitive assessments, but you should think about if to use them and when to use them. And if you look into that data, you can see one thing, and that's the predictive power of cognitive ability seems to increase with the complexity of the job role. And when we were building our platform, we thought about the Sackett study quite extensively. And we thought that we need to help people use assessments in a good way. One way of going about that is actually showing you what's good enough when it comes to cognitive ability assessments, given the complexity of the role. So one thing you can do in our platform is actually tell us what kind of role this is and how complex is it. And the platform will give you guidance on what's good enough. And if you choose a low complexity role there, the platform will show you that there's no kind of threshold in terms of what we call a cutoff score. And that means that you should actually think about using the cognitive ability assessment in that given role, So I would say in low complexity roles, you should have a look at your candidate pool and, of course, the number of applicants. If you have a high number of applicants, it's probably still good reasons for using a cognitive ability assessment. But if you have a low complexity job and few applicants, should you use a cognitive ability assessment then? Maybe not, given the latest findings. And that's something that's interesting to focus on. And then another thing that we doubled down on was, of course, how to make it easier for people to run properly structured interviews, because that's something that's been, I would say, proven to be maybe the most important method of them all. And across all of these studies, the structured interview is always on top or quite near the top, So that's also something we focused on in our platform, building a solution for that as well. So I think we have a lot of examples of trying to build upon the latest research in terms of how to build the best assessments, but also build the best platform for people to use when they do assessments and interviews. And I think I've always said that when the evidence is updated, we need to update practice as well.
Yeah.
And I think our platform is an example of trying to take that into consideration.
What do you see as the weaknesses of personality and ability tests? What don't you cover with running these tests?
For personality measurements, I would say that it's related to the report method, which means self-report. So the big question in personality inventories is whether we can trust the data because it's based upon self-report.
Yeah.
And I think it's hard to get around that issue. There are potential methods, but that will always be there as long as we speak about personality inventories. In my opinion, I think that personality is massively important for work life. I think it's hard to measure it, and the challenges is related to the measurement methods, not the fact that personality is not important at the workplace. So I think that's the main issue with personality instruments. In terms of ability testing, I think one thing that was quite important for us when we set up Fairsight was the issue of the use of AI in faking. So the way we choose to go around that was to design tools that were hard or impossible to fake on. So we wanted to do that from the start in how we design the tools so they're more interactive than traditional static tools. I think those maybe are the most challenging. I was thinking about one more thing, Lasse, and that's a topic that we to a certain extent think might be dodged a bit by the assessment industry, and that is related to test anxiety.
Yeah.
So there are studies that shows that some candidates, when they open their computer and see the first page of a test, typically ability test, they if they don't get a brain freeze necessarily, they get some sort of anxiety. So we spent some time on thinking around that. I don't know if you want to say something about that.
Yeah, that was one of the challenges that we wanted to tackle head on, because we saw that our industry dodged it or tried to educate the users in terms of how to kind of give instructions to candidates before they do assessments. You've probably done it to thousands of times. Make sure that you slept well, and don't be disturbed and all sorts of stuff. And then life happens, And we saw, but maybe we could do something to actually try to improve this. And one way of going about that was implementing pause functionality in our ability assessment. So between tasks, you can get a short break to kind of get the stress down, or if you a colleague or whatever came into the room, you can get them out of the room, and try to focus again. But the main reason there is to try to improve the candidate experience when it comes to ability assessments. But we also think it can improve accuracy. There are tons of examples of people underperforming in terms of disturbances, stress, etc. And we think that with a pause, maybe we'd actually get a more true measurement of where your actual potential are. So there's tons of kind of good reasons for why to do it, not just focusing on the individual, but also on kind of what's the data we actually get out of it. And I think, it's an example of trying to bring new thoughts to the market in terms of avoiding some of those weaknesses that we see in historically. Yeah. Personality could be another example, actually. We quite recently implemented a replace statement functionality in our personality assessments that makes you able to actually switch out an item or a statement if you don't understand it, don't want to relate to it, And I think that also improves the candidate experience, but also potentially the accuracy, because when people get annoyed or don't understand something in a personality assessment as well, maybe they just answer randomly,
That makes sense. You mentioned a bit on AI, Espen, and the faking part of it. So now we see a lot of these AI agents and the involvement of AI, not necessarily only like ChatGPT, but AI taking over computer and just sort of can resonate based on what they see on the screen. So how do you see that challenge moving forward?
Could I start on this?
Hot topic.
No, but it's we had a major advantage in terms of the competition, and that's starting up in 2022 when especially Gen AI exploded. And we come from a background where we were involved in designing AI 10 years ago, so we have some experience around the pitfalls and where to use it and where not to use it, etc. from our perspective. But of course, now we have tons of solutions on the candidate side as well. And when we were developing our assessments, we developed them with kind of like AI in mind. So we had a side track where we tested everything with AI tools to see how can you actually use these kind of aids in terms of getting, assistance to answer different assessments. And we saw one thing keep popping up. And that's around interactive elements. So for us, when we designed especially our ability assessment, it was important for us to make it more interactive. Yeah. Because that's, of course, is more engaging in that way as well. But when you don't have kind of like a set task where you can feed different AI solutions, this is how the task looks, and this is kind of like the right answer, etc. It becomes way more difficult to actually use that as a co-pilot in terms of helping you answer it. So I think that's part of it, at least, to actually make tools that will work in, I like to call it a post-Gen AI era. And of course, there's other solutions as well now popping up. It's not just with assessments. You look at virtual interviews, for example. Now we have AI clones doing interviews, and you have people having these web browser extensions that has a transcriber kind of solution in it. So it transcribes the question you are being answered by the interviewer, and it gives you an answer to in real time. So there's it's quite a different world, We talked about this sometime, maybe we're in an era now where people want to meet up as we do now, and actually meet people and do a physical kind of on-site interview because you have all of these challenges with technology adding some more uncertainty than previously. So it's quite an interesting time to be involved in hiring and assessments and our kind of industry.
This might be shaming competitors, but for those companies that didn't build this in 2022, old assessment tools, how much can we trust that data or the test results from the candidates? How common is it to cheat these tests?
It's not a huge problem. We need to be open about that as well. Some data indicates that if you're looking at kind of like Europe and the US, you're talking about maybe 3%. If you go to Asia, some studies indicate that it could be slightly higher, maybe 7% or something like that. And we have competitors or people from our industry operating with percentages around 1 to 1.5 in their data, So I don't know where the actual number is, but it's not the case where everybody wants to fake, but most people will be doing it in a compliant way and being open and honest and all sorts of things. But it's still important to recognize that some formats are more challenged now and some assessments are more challenged now. So if you look at, for instance, verbal assessments, kind of like reasoning tests that are based upon understanding text, they are very challenged at the moment, when it comes to Gen AI. And scientifically published studies already show that I think the average score of the GPT 4.0 model when it comes to verbal reasoning assessments is around the 75th percentile. And if you look at the average human, that's on the 50th percentile. This means that the majority of people will have an advantage by using, for instance, GPT as a co-pilot when you're answering verbal reasoning tests. So, of course, it's a challenge with those tools. And I think that's something that we can communicate quite openly. But we still see that AI struggles more when it comes to numerical assessments. And if you move to the logical space, it struggles even more. We, the assessment industry, we need to be on top of this because things are progressing very, very fast now, you know, and if you are not on top of it, I think you will have challenges when it comes to how much you can actually trust the assessments.
Can I also ask Lasse a question?
Yeah.
Thank you. You remember, Lasse, if we go back to 2016,
We were part of acquiring a company in India, which used a solution which was called Eye in the Sky.
Yeah.
And what basically happened was that the camera was switched on when the candidate did the ability test.
Yeah.
What's your view on that?
No, I think it's then you try to tackle a problem by making everyone a problem. And as we just touched upon, it's a minority of people that actually are willing to fake. But if we implement kind of like a webcam solution to monitor you while you do the assessments, I think you run the risk of losing the best talent, because the best talent always has options, and they will say, screw it, I'm not going to do this assessment, I will apply somewhere else, or you will get a bigger dropout basically. And we saw that as a huge issue, especially in Europe. We saw that some organizations were just saying, no, we will never use that kind of solution. It's better to try to design the assessments in a way where you make it more difficult to people to actually do some sort of faking, you know. That could be related to how you time it and interactive elements and all sorts of stuff, you know.
Do you think in the future that assessment tools will embrace AI? Like, because using AI properly is also a skill in itself. Right? Like using internet, I don't know if it's connected with inductive logical reasoning, or like how do you can maximize use of AI. That's maybe not for ability or personality, but maybe work sample testing. It's maybe like used in that context today. But do you see that being part of your assessment tool in the future?
I don't know if this actually answers your question, but it makes me think of an example where there was this panel debate, which I was a part of with some other people from our industry. And we touched upon this topic of AI and cheating and all sorts of stuff. And one of the persons that were in the audience then was somebody that wanted to start using ability assessments as a form of screening their graduates in graduate recruitment. And that person got back to me and said, we want to try to fake your assessment before we actually use it. And this is a technology company which some of the people are very, very, I would say, advanced AI users. And they tried to fake it, and basically they weren't able to fake it. That's the short story of it. But one of those guys that were really advanced in terms of using AI was the founder of this company. And he said that if people are able to fake it, I want to hire those people because, you know, he saw that he wasn't able to do anything with it. So basically, I think you touched upon something really relevant, you know, measuring AI and understanding of AI and how to make use of it, even though you're not an AI expert. I think that's something that will increase in importance going forward. Yeah, for sure.
You get people with high ability, but maybe dark side personality traits. I don't know.
Potentially.
I want to tap a bit into work sample tests here, because you guys are handling personality testing, ability testing, but also helping out with the structure interviews. And one method that's very commonly used or maybe misused is work sample testing or business cases or random questions like number of traffic lights in London or whatnot. So there are different ways of assessing people. I think a work sample test is something we see in 99% of our processes. And we're also advising our clients on how do you measure that accurately, how do you design for something that's actually close to the work itself and not just sort of these random 1% of the role projects. So how would you go about designing a work sample test?
I think one key element when it comes to work samples, which I think sometimes is missing and is quite important in terms of keeping that high so-called predictive validity, is the actual evaluation or the scoring of it, you know. So people make a task that you're able to you're supposed to solve in some sort of way as a candidate, but then the evaluation is gut feel, you know. So you sit back and this was a good answer.
Nice.
So they forget the most critical aspect, which is also the most difficult aspect, which is the scoring of it actually.
I completely agree. And if I can allow myself to add, Lasse, I think it's a bit like the job interview.
Yeah.
It's very, very easy to create an exercise or a job sample. It's easy to create job interviews. I mean, by the use of AI today, it's super easy. And the challenge is the scoring and the evaluation in hindsight. And I think that's, you know, probably the most important thing. And I think it's also an area where technology is essential, but also the concepts you mentioned in the start of our conversation, which is related to reliability, you know, that it's measuring. And in the job sample test, that means, like, let's say if you guys were interviewing me, or if I did an exercise that you were supposed to evaluate, that you're doing it based upon the same indicators and the same principles, inter-rater reliability. So making sure that you guys are calibrated, basically, and to quality ensure that is not very often done within even the big companies, you know, where they use like brain teasers and all that.
Brain teasers are interesting.
Brain teasers are very interesting.
Slight digression, but it was a very cool study. I think it was back in 2018. Scott Highhouse. He and some colleagues, they did this very interesting study on brain teaser questions, and they showed that people that like to ask those brain teaser questions, like how many manholes are they in Oslo or something like that, you know, on a personality level, they score quite high on sadism, and I think it was psychopathy and narcissism. So interesting relationship.
So if you're a candidate coming into an interview and then you get that question, then you don't want that leader.
And you can see that leader all smug, you know, like let's see how he answers this one. So it's a red flag potentially. And no evidence whatsoever in terms of what it actually measures, you know. Avoid those for the listeners out there using brain teasers. Please stop using them. They have no evidence whatsoever.
I don't necessarily have a beef with the personality test, because like we use them a lot. I get real value out of them, but we've been talking a lot about this previously, Lasse, and that's when you do personality test, you select some competencies that you want to deep dive in and measure the candidates on these specific competencies or personality traits. But you don't know necessarily by like research that you're selecting the right personality traits or the right competencies. You might have a competency model of, I don't know, 15 or 20 or 25 competencies, and then you select 4 and you want to deep dive and measure those 4. But what if those are irrelevant? Usually that's quite subjective, right? Because you don't have data to support, hey, these 4 are actually the most important personality traits or competencies in the role. So how do you hedge that? In a perfect world, you know, but when you don't know, how do you go about like selecting the right ones?
You're touching upon something important here, because in sometimes we can't be sure that we're actually picking the right competencies. One thing we're looking into now is actually something more kind of based on research, you know, showing that these are the most relevant competencies for a given job role. AI is an example here as well, you know, if you have some job description information, maybe the AI can help you with actually identifying the most crucial ones. So I think you're touching upon an area of competency-based hiring where you can potentially do some improvements. It's also an example of the importance of a proper job analysis. So maybe the oldest thing from hiring research is job analysis, you know, and it never goes out of fashion. So I think, you know, you need to actually spend proper amount of time on job analysis. Then you will, of course, de-risk that whole picking and choosing of competencies. So,
And Lasse, you've been working with some of the biggest consulting companies in the world.
Yeah.
In some of these projects, you have initiated something that we internally call validation studies.
Yeah, that's an interesting.
Absolutely. Shoot.
Because a validation study is basically when you do some testing of the kind of like internal people in a role, and you match them towards some sort of performance criteria, and then usually you end up with a highly predictive model. And that's, the best, that's kind of like the best solution for that problem that which you raised is which are the most relevant competencies for this role. If you are able to run these validation studies, which I know you like, Thor, and I know you want to do them as well, you will be more sure that you're actually looking at the most, important characteristics of an individual. That's the gold standard, but it demands quite a lot of data for everyone to be able to do it, basically, because you need the high volumes of people in the same role and these kinds of things. But if you're able to run them, you can get a very, very predictive hiring process.
Yeah. You need to also define what success looks like in the role.
And that's something difficult for many roles,
And I know that, quite a few of our clients, and probably your clients as well, Thor, they are concerned about the ROI in terms of hiring and their procedures. And how would you relate that to the validation studies?
Oh, it's so interesting, because historically we've done so many of these kind of studies, and it could be everything from, call centers struggling with turnover, and you can predict who will actually stay on for a month longer. And that's the whole business case. Let's say all you need is to be able to have people for 4 months. That's something you can actually predict. And with a validation study, I was involved in a study where we could predict who was going to sell on an average 18% more. So it's could be turned into quite a lot of money, basically, also as well, for an organization, hiring in the right way. And it could be predicting pilots in terms of who is going to pass a simulation. So it's all sorts of different metrics that you can actually predict early on with assessments if you are able to run these kinds of validation studies.
I'm just so baffled that there are so huge organizations out there with spending tons of cash in recruitment. And this seems to be like, if you spend cash anywhere, like spend it here. Do a proper validation study.
But you're touching upon something that has baffled me as long as I've been in this industry. And that's what are we struggling to actually tell people about the advantages of doing this? Because if I was a CHRO in a big organization, it would be a no-brainer for me to do this, because the evidence is so overwhelmingly in favor of doing it, because you will hire better. It's uncontroversial to say we have tons of evidence supporting it. So I agree with you. It's one of those... I keep coming back to, and we talked, I think it's not that many weeks ago, we actually talked about this. What aren't we communicating in the correct way in terms of people not understanding the value around this?
Good. Okay, I want to go a bit maybe behind the scenes in Fairsight. So you've been operating for 2-ish years?
Yeah, obviously,